I just did.
Okay, we ready?
Yeah.
So we talked about the success plan yesterday with Dave Ramsey, right? That kind of plan, the 7 steps. Here is this condensed down into 3 steps. This was my wife's great grandpa. I'll call it Leroy Kirby advice because that was his name. So with this advice, it's only 3 steps. He always said that you can borrow money for a vehicle. So you can go in debt for one good vehicle, because how can you turn $20 into $850 in 1 week? How can you take $20 and turn that into $850 or more in 1 week? Buy $20 worth of gas and then drive to work and back.
Yes.
Yes. So that's the best return on your investment you could ever make. Best return on your investment by far. So you need a good way to go to work. Now, would it be good to be able to buy a used vehicle that you can afford and pay cash for it? Yes. But if you can't, the one vehicle you can afford to loan the money for. You can borrow money for a house because you need a good place to live. Okay? Everything else, pay cash. Save your money before you buy something. If you want a new four-wheeler, yes, it's really easy to get a loan, but it is better to save that money for, a year or two and then just pay cash money for it. And that way you're not in any debt. Okay? If you buy a brand new Polaris side-by-side right now, they can put you on a 3-year payment plan. It's going to cost you an extra $700 in interest in 3 years. Which may not sound bad, but then you have that payment every month that you're stuck with. Okay? So that's that. Now, we'll get to this in just a second. Let's talk about government aid to agriculture.
I have a question.
Yes, what's your question?
So, let's say you accidentally skip a month. Can they, repossess it and keep the money that you already, spent on it?
Yes. 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 Yeah, that's the reason you need to be careful with borrowing money, because if you don't make the payments, then they can come repossess that, and all that money that you paid in, it could have been, you could have had a car payment and had it loaned out and made 71 out of 72 payments.
And then forgot to pay 1 month and then get your car repossessed
Yes.
with all the money already spent.
Usually they'll let you go a couple months, and they'll be, they'll be calling you, sending you letters like, hey, you're past due. Usually these companies will, if you're past due, you can pay the next month. Okay? They'll usually give you that much leniency, but some are not. Some put it in the fine print, you miss one payment, it's ours. Some of these smaller car lots that finance the cars themselves, if you don't make that weekly payment or that monthly payment, they come and get it. That's how they make a lot of their money. Okay? Because here they made all that money off of you making payments, then they have the car back and they sell it to somebody else who's making payments at a very high interest rate. So do be aware of those places, small car lots. I'm not saying don't buy a vehicle from them, but be cautious if you're going to borrow money from them to drive a vehicle. Okay? It'd be better off for you to save the money and then buy the vehicle outright. Okay, let's talk about government aid. That was a very good question. So government aid. There are price floors out there. You've probably learned about that a little bit in economics already. Okay? Price floors. That's the lowest price that commodity can be sold for. If it starts dropping below that, the government will step in and will help farmers, because farming is not a get in, get out business. It's not like you just started a t-shirt printing shop and then, you're going to sell that business when you get ready to retire. Farming can be done in one generation, but it is set up to be passed down to the next generation. Okay? And the government understands that. That's the reason they aid farmers and try to keep them in business, because they realize that we are a superpower due to our agriculture. Okay? We provide the world a lot of food. We create, we grow our own food, and that is what makes us a superpower. So if we do not have farmers, we're not going to be a strong country. So the government helps. The government helps through a few things called subsidies. Okay, subsidies. That's when the price falls too low, the government will pay the farmers. Okay, subsidies will come in many forms. So yesterday I signed some paperwork on my farm because I have goats. I had goats last year. I still have goats that are in production, and I had some COVID relief money come my way from the government because when I sold goats last year, the price was a little lower. So I get $45 back on the goats that I sold. That's going to be coming in the mail. Right? That's just government relief. Other ways the government helps is with bases, okay? So if you raise a crop in a field, you like a certain variety, like you say, you raise rice in that field. You now have a rice base. Every year you're going to get money from the government as a rice base check, or a soybean base, or a milo base. That's just money a farmer can count on to try to keep them going every year. Other money that comes in from the government, CRP, that's Conservation Reserve Program. After World War I, if you remember from our first unit, when we have a wartime, there's an increase in ag production, there's an increase in manufacturing as well. But after wartime, that needs to stop. Okay, and that's what kind of threw us into the Great Depression, was a huge surplus. Farmers couldn't make any money, and then they went out of business. To stop that from happening after World War II, they started creating the Conservation Reserve Program, which is farmland that's set aside, that's been planted in native grasses, that's not in ag production. So we're not raising corn in those fields or soybeans. But it's up to the farmer to make sure that trees don't grow up in that. So it's sitting there idle. It's idle land that can be farmed in case we need, extra food. Okay, so it's setting aside. The government pays you not to farm that land. Works out really good. Okay, you're not making as much on it as you would farming it, but it's enough to let farmers say, okay, I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to let that be for wildlife, CRP. What we have on our farm is called buffer zones or buffer strips. We can look at an aerial map of my farm, or my family farm, and it has CRP around the creeks. Okay, that is there to catch any extra fertilizer, any extra chemical, any extra soil that washes off the hills before it goes into the water supply. Okay, and we planted Cerisa lespedeza there in the early 2000s, and it's supposed to be for wildlife, and it filters that water before it goes to the creeks. It works out good. We could probably make more by farming it, but it's a steady check that my grandma gets every year, so it works out good for her. And it around those creeks, that area, if we farmed it, would wash anyway, or the trees would shade it out, or the roots would pull the moisture from the crop. So it works pretty well. All we have to do is bush hog it once a year to make sure trees don't grow up in it. Because if trees grow up in it, then they'll void our contract. There is federal crop insurance. Farmers can get their own private crop insurance, but there is federal crop insurance out there. Let's say that we had a really wet spring, and corn is one of the first things we're going to plant in the spring. Okay? Plant in the spring, but not in the water. So if it's too wet, we can't plant the corn. Farmers can file preventative planting, okay? Which means they couldn't get in the field to plant the crop. So they can draw a government check off of that. Okay? And disaster relief. So like the COVID relief money is somewhat of a disaster relief. The farmers in Iowa that lost all their corn back last month when the big storm came through and just flattened all of it, that will be disaster relief. They will be, hopefully there'll be enough government money to try to keep those farmers in business there. So it's all just to try to keep the farmers in business. Okay? That it?
Yes, sir.